Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. Today we are going to be talking about one of those classic old school decks that have been around so long people didn't play Standard or Legacy or Modern or Historic. They just played Magic because there was only the one format. That's right, it's old school, it's really good, always has been, and everything old is new again here with Kamigawa, as we now see Standard emerging with not only an Enchantress style deck, but also a Shrine deck coming back into Standard. And I said, hey, what would be more budget friendly than combining those two decks into a single list? So here we go, guys. Stay tuned. But before we get into all that, what do you say we do the awkward thing and promote the channel? Allow me to take this opportunity to invite you to subscribe to the Planeswalker Stronghold for all your new player, free-to-play, budget, and midweek Magic needs. As you can see, we aren't one of these huge channels that fluctuates tons of subscribers on any given day and doesn't even notice. Around here, you matter. Just like these fine folks here, who recently subscribed to the channel and chose to make their subscription public. You see, the YouTube algorithm seems to think that budget arena content doesn't matter. And while I know I can't change that, I think we can. So click the subscribe button to support the channel, and tap the bell icon so you don't miss on an upload. And build a more efficient collection along the way. Now, what were we talking about? Oh, right. And here it is, guys, the card that started it all, the Verdirian Enchantress, a 0/2, so really no combat effectiveness whatsoever for 3 mana. But the lovely thing here is what we would now call a triggered ability. Every time an enchantment entered the battlefield, you got to draw a card. Of course, the wording on it is somewhat archaic by today's standards, and, well, a lot about this card did not survive well, right down to the slightly risque art in it, just slightly. But anyway, this is the card that started it all. This allowed a deck to run enchantments successfully at a point in time where most enchantments were creature auras that we would now call auras. So there was a huge inefficiency introduced into them. There was very few just generic enchantments that did not need to enchant something. But this gave you a reason to run them, and the really cool thing about it is through all the card draw and different search techniques and things like that, you could run what you call a toolbox deck, or some people might call it a silver bullet deck, the silver bullet analogy being a more apt term for today's standard. Because the idea being, if you need to kill a werewolf, you only need 1 silver bullet. 2 is not necessary. The idea here being that you could run 1 or 2 copies of a single problem solver and several search components to allow you to get whatever you needed at any given time without gumming up your deck with a bunch of cards that were very situational and really did not allow much versatility, because it's only been a fairly recent thing in Magic's 30-something year history now that flexible cards became a thing. You used to have a card that would kill an enchantment, or another card that killed an artifact, or another card that killed a creature. You never saw cards that allowed you to do multiple things. So having that toolbox strategy is really one of the things that made Enchantress not only a very good deck, but also very budget friendly right from the beginning, because after the 4 copies of Enchantress, which was a rare, again, this even predates the concept of mythic cards, you really didn't need 2, 3, 4 copies of any other rare card. At most, you probably just needed 1. All right, so now that we've talked about Enchantress in general, let's talk about it for Standard and look at this monstrosity of a deck I have Frankenstein together here. We are pretty much going with a snow base, mostly plains and forests here. In fact, really slated toward the plains. We do have 3 copies of Shimmerdrift Vale in there, mostly to get those off colors of red, blue, or black. But of course, if you already have one of those or all of those colors available, you can still play this as a somewhat negative tempo version of a plain or a forest. It is also a snow land that can be relevant for things like Blizzard Brawl and things of that sort. We are also running 1 copy of all of the relevant pathways here. So they have to produce either green or white, and if not both, the off color of blue or red or black. That way, when you get to your shrines, you have the mana available to play them. It's a total of 3 cards in the deck and a total of 3 non-green or white pips in the entire deck. So pretty streamlined. You don't have to have them to win, but it does create an interesting secondary effect. Of course, since we're running that Snowland, Blizzard Brawl seems like a very natural inclusion. I'm running 3 copies, and while we're at it, let's go ahead and talk about the other pieces of removal in the deck, because they're pretty ubiquitous and you can trade them out pretty evenly, I think, one for the other, and get very similar effects. Our other removal, of course, is in the form of enchantments. I am running 1 copy of Borrowed Time to target things that otherwise Intercessor's Arrest cannot. Again, the removal, it's a total of 6 pieces. You can kind of play with them around, do some different things with it. Depending upon what we end up seeing in the meta, those can shake out pretty nicely. The other piece of removal, of course, is the Black Shrine, allowing you to destroy hopefully multiple toughness creatures. It itself also has Death Touch, so it is a bit of an ominous threat sitting on the board as a creature in and of itself. From there, getting into the more Enchantress style build, we are of course running 4 copies of Generous Visitor, because he just loves enchantments. And always remember, guys, Generous Visitor doesn't have to put the counter on himself. He doesn't have to put the counter on another creature. He can do either one. So always remember that's very, very flexible depending upon what kind of deck you're facing and what kind of removal you may be looking at. Darnheart Geist, I think this is one of the more cuttable cards if you have other things you want to be running. It is basically just an enchantment proc to help you gain life and make sure you get to that mid to late game where the deck just becomes an inevitability. One of the most important cards, I think, in Standard right now, or at least one of the most important uncommons, is going to be Michiko's Reign of Truth and a Portrait of Michiko. This is just an All That Glitters effect for 2 turns, and then turns into a creature that is on board All That Glitters. Pretty fantastic. Run 4 copies. Get 4 copies as soon as you possibly can. This is one of those cards that's going to be busted for ages and ages. Spirited Companion is basically just an enchantment proc. It is a 1/1 to gum up the board a little bit, and it allows you to draw a card. Very nice. Then we've got our Blue Shrine with the Mill effect. More importantly, though, this is a 2-drop 0/4 flyer, so it makes for a very convenient blocker for a long period of time. And again, allows you to get to that mid to late game where a Shrine's deck just takes on a certain form of inevitability. Eventually, you will win. Boundless Vigor is our green shrine, and it is one of the two that we're running 2 copies of. As a 1/1 trample, it has the potential to get out of control, particularly when you start putting +1/+1 counters on a shrine you control. This being a trampler can get really, really crazy. We talked about the Death Touch Black Shrine as a way of gumming up the board. And of course, if you need to, you can make your Lost Wisdom a solid threat as a flyer. One of the rares that's in here that you don't necessarily have to have, but if you get it or multiple copies of it, Kami of Transience is really, really nice. Again, it has that trample. It starts out as a 2/2 for 2, so decent baseline stats. But whenever you cast an enchantment spell, not when an enchantment comes into play, just casting the spell will proc this. And when it does, you put a +1/+1 counter on Kami of Transience. At the beginning of each end step, if an enchantment was put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, you may return Kami of Transience from the graveyard to your hand. So not only can it become a very big trampling threat, but it's recursive as well. Also running a single copy of Ranger class. This is mostly to keep the deck really budget, because I know you have at least 1 copy of this enchantment because you got it in your new player experience. If you happen to run more, I would say a second copy is not a bad idea. More than that, it doesn't have quite enough synergy. But 1-2 copies, probably very good if you're looking to fill out space. If you're not, this is an easy cut for something like Kami of Transience, or maybe even another copy of Spirited Companion. Last up at the 2-drop spot is probably one of the more important 2-drop cards in the deck. The Jukai Naturalist with the green-white. It's a 2/2 with a lifelink, and enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less. Imagine that, a deck full of enchantments that suddenly just got cheaper. Also, keep in mind that this guy is an enchantment himself, so while he doesn't make other copies of himself cheaper, he will proc other things like Kami of Transience. He feeds Michiko. He procs Dawnhart Geist, Generous Visitor. I think you guys are seeing the synergy here. Also, not a legendary creature, so you can have out multiple copies of this very, very easily. We talked about Borrowed Time and Intercessor's Arrest for removal purposes. Next up in the 3-drop spot, we got Moonblessed Cleric, a 3/2, so decent stats in its own right. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, then shuffle and put it on top. This basically gives you 3 tutors to go get a shrine, to go get removal, to go get a naturalist, a Spirited Companion, a Michiko. This basically just creates a toolbox within your deck. And speaking of toolbox cards, the reason we're not running 4 copies of the Moonblessed Cleric is because you probably have at least 1 copy of Search for Glory running around in your deck. Another reason that we're running Snow Base on this. This Snow Sorcery allows you to search your library for a Snow permanent card. That includes your lands, as well as your Shimmerdrift Vale. It also will allow you to search up a legendary, like all of your shrines. It will also allow you to search up a saga card, like Michiko. So it's really a universal toolbox option for you to let you go get either a snow permanent, a legendary card, or a saga. And for 3 mana, that's going to be pretty good. And on top of that, it goes directly to your hand, not on top of your library, and you gain 1 life for each snow mana spent to cast this spell, so you could very easily be gaining 3 life off of this. And again, extending your life total allows you to get to that turn 4, turn 5 mid-late game where this deck just becomes an inevitability. Then we have our red shrine, a 2/2 first strike, so it can be a threat on the board, particularly if you're adding +1/+1 counters to it with our Boundless Vigor shrine. This shrine in and of itself allows you to pay 1 and deal X damage to target player or planeswalker, where X is the number of shrines you control. This is part of that inevitability package and also lets you answer planeswalkers fairly well, particularly if you've got 3 or 4 shrines on the field, as I suspect you might very easily do. Let's see, we talked about the black shrine, but not the white shrine. This allows you to create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token for each shrine you control, again allowing you to gum up the board, easily have some chump blockers, or to long-term alpha strike with a ridiculous number of 1/1 creatures. So that's pretty much the deck for standard, guys. I definitely thought about including Mirror Box in this, but I think this is not the deck for that. We may do another deck similar with shrines or other legendaries with that, or to be frank, there will probably be other content creators covering that, because I think it's kind of low-hanging fruit and not particularly budget-minded if you're building around a rare card that you're gonna need at least 3 copies of the same card. So I may just leave that for someone who is better suited to talk about it. But at any rate, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again real soon.
Wait, what's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt wants you to know the links are in the doobly-doo.
All right, so with all that having been said, don't forget, smash the like button like Hulk would. And of course, comment and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And one last thing, myself, I'm coming to you from America, and I have noticed that about 1/3 of my viewership is coming from the US, and about 1/3 is coming from various countries. And there's about 1/3 of my viewership that is just getting lumped into other. So to let me know you got to the end of the video, throw me a comment down in there and let me know where you are watching from.